It is before dawn on November the 27th, 1942. The harbour at Toulon, on the southern coast of France, is still. Then the engines start. French naval engines below decks, in the holds of ships still flying the tricolour. 77 warships. Sea cocks opening. Fuel lines cut. Demolition charges placed at the waterlines by French sailors on the orders of French officers. The water begins to rise in the engine rooms. The ships begin to list. Smoke curls from the superstructures. One by one, in the grey light before sunrise, the most powerful naval force in the Mediterranean slides beneath the surface of a French harbour. Destroyed by French hands to keep it from the Germans, who are coming through the gates. The French are scuttling their own fleet, not because anyone made them, not because they had to, because the Germans came for the ships, and the French destroyed them first, exactly as they had always said they would. 29 months earlier, the British government did not believe this would happen. That disbelief cost 1,297 lives. It is the summer of 1940. 8 weeks earlier, Britain and France were allies. 1 million British soldiers stood on French soil alongside the armies of the Republic. The alliance held. The cause was shared. Then Germany moved, and the world came apart faster than anyone had thought the world could come apart. Within days, the Allied line buckled in a dozen places. Within weeks, the British Army had been driven to the sea at Dunkirk. 338,000 men evacuated across the Channel. Yes, but without their tanks, their guns, their artillery, their vehicles. Nearly everything they had brought to France was left on the beaches or lost in the rout. The French fought on alone. For another 3 weeks they retreated and bled, buying time that could not be bought. On June 17th, France asked for terms. The armistice was signed 5 days later in a railway carriage in the forest at Compiègne, the same carriage in which Germany had surrendered in 1918. Hitler had the carriage brought out of a museum. He broke the seal on the door himself. He sat in the chair Foch had sat in. The symmetry was the point. Britain stands alone. What that meant in the last days of June 1940 was this: an island. No continental army, no ally within reach. The army that remained was barely equipped with rifles. There would be no second front. No rescue. There would only be what Britain could hold. And what Britain could hold depended entirely on one thing: the sea. Churchill understood this with his bones. He had been First Lord of the Admiralty in the Great War, and again in this one. He knew that the Royal Navy was not simply a fighting force. It was the mechanism by which Britain imported food, received American arms, communicated with its empire, and prevented the Wehrmacht from loading its armored divisions onto transports and sailing for Kent. Lose command of the sea, and everything else became irrelevant. Now sitting in ports across North Africa and the Mediterranean was the 4th largest fleet in the world. 7 battleships. 19 cruisers, 71 destroyers, 76 submarines. The French Navy, legally under the control of an armistice government in Vichy, answerable in varying degrees to Berlin. In the harbour of Mers-el-Kébir, on the Algerian coast near Oran, lay the ships that mattered most, the battleships Bretagne and Provence. 2 modern battle cruisers, Dunkirk and Strasbourg, specifically designed and built to outgun the German ships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, a seaplane carrier, 6 destroyers. All of them moored stern, first to a long, narrow jetty facing land, one oblique channel between them and open water. The question facing Winston Churchill was not abstract. If the Germans obtained these ships, through pressure, through a surprise seizure, through a compliant Vichy government making the calculation that concession was cheaper than resistance, the Atlantic became a different sea. Britain's imports could not survive it. Britain could not survive it. What would you do? France's naval minister, Admiral François Darlan, had given his personal word. The fleet would never go to Germany. He had told this to Britain's First Sea Lord on June 18th, and he had given standing orders that his ships were to be scuttled if any foreign power attempted to seize them. His sincerity, most historians believe, was genuine. Churchill did not trade in sincerity. He had watched Hitler receive solemn assurances from the governments of Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, and Norway, and then discard each one on a pretext. The armistice terms themselves contained a German declaration that the French fleet would not be touched, an article, a promise. In the summer of 1940, German promises had a visible track record. One detail sat at the center of all of this, noticed by almost no one who needed to notice it. Darlan had given Gensul, his commander at Mers-el-Kébir, standing orders. If a foreign power threatened to seize his ships, sail them to the United States, it was already written, already in Gensul's instructions. The British, when they drafted their ultimatum, would offer him almost exactly this option. Gensul would refuse it. The reasons for that refusal would cost 1,297 men their lives. The operation Churchill authorized was called Catapult. It was global in scope. Every French warship within reach of the Royal Navy was to be dealt with simultaneously on July 3rd, before any of them knew what was coming. In British ports, French ships would be seized without warning. In Alexandria, Admiral Andrew Cunningham would present the French squadron there with the same demands, and at Mers-el-Kébir, Force H would deliver an ultimatum under the guns. The ultimatum offered 4 options: sail with the Royal Navy and continue fighting, sail to a British port under escort, sail to Martinique in the French West Indies where the ships could be disarmed or handed to the United States, or scuttle in place. 4 exits from the same room. Any of them would do. None of them required French sailors to abandon their allegiance, their honor, or their country. They required only that the ships be placed beyond German reach. Churchill believed the French would refuse. He may have needed them to refuse, because the political value of what followed, if it came to that, was not nothing. Britain alone in July 1940 needed to convince the world it would not stop. America was watching. The War Cabinet was watching. An act of cold resolve, however painful, was its own kind of signal. None of this made the decision clean. Churchill himself would later call it the most hateful decision, the most unnatural and painful in which I have ever been concerned. He said it, and then he ordered it anyway. The night of July 2nd. The Mediterranean, south of Gibraltar. HMS Hood moves through the darkness at speed, her great hull cutting flat water, barely lit against the night. Force H. Hood, the battleships Valiant and Resolution, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, 2 cruisers, 11 destroyers. The largest warship in the world leading a force built for war, moving toward men who, 6 weeks ago, were on the same side. Vice Admiral Sir James Somerville stands on the bridge of Hood and reads the message from Admiral Pound in London. A personal signal, admiral to admiral, marked accordingly, not an order in the formal sense, but the full weight of one. Proceed to Mers-el-Kébir. Present the ultimatum. Give the French every opportunity to comply, and if they do not, before dark, sink them. Somerville is 57 years old. He had been medically discharged from the Royal Navy the previous year, a suspected tuberculosis diagnosis that would prove unfounded, and recalled to service barely a month ago to help coordinate the Dunkirk evacuation. This is his first significant operational command since his return. He has spent his life in the Royal Navy. He knows French officers. He has friends in the Marine Nationale. He is beloved by the men under him, and he had argued against this mission before leaving Gibraltar to anyone with the authority to reverse the order. He had been overruled. Now he stands on the bridge of the largest warship in the world and watches the Mediterranean slide past in the darkness. He is very still. Below him, in Hood's forward turrets, the 15-inch guns sit trained fore and aft, not yet raised toward a target. July 3rd. Before first light. At 04:45, HMS Foxhound stops outside the harbour entrance at Mers-el-Kébir. Captain Cedric Holland, Hooky Holland, captain of Ark Royal, fluent in French, assigned to this because he spent 3 years in Paris as naval attaché and still counts officers of the Marine Nationale among his friends, transfers to the ship's launch for the final passage to the boom. He is not permitted through. Vice Admiral Gensoul will not see him. This is not spite. In the code by which both men have spent their careers, a flag officer does not negotiate with a captain. Rank is not a formality in the Marine Nationale. It is the armature of authority, the condition under which orders carry their full weight. To receive a foreign ultimatum from a junior officer is to consent to one's own diminishment. Gensoul sends his flag aide, Lieutenant Bernard Dufay, a man Holland knows personally from Paris, to receive what Holland has brought. Holland passes across the written ultimatum. 4 options, the full text. At 0500, on the horizon, the shapes of Force H appear. Hood first, then the others behind her, silhouetted against the morning light. Gensoul orders Foxhound to leave his harbour. He signals his ships to raise steam and prepare for action. He begins drafting his report to the French Admiralty. What he writes will determine everything that follows. The report goes at mid-morning. Gensoul tells Paris that a British force has appeared off Mers-el-Kébir with an ultimatum. Scuttle, or we will sink you. He gives a time limit. His reply has been that French ships will answer force with force. There were 4 options in that ultimatum. Gensoul describes 2. The West Indies option, gone. The British port option, gone. The offer to continue fighting alongside the Royal Navy, gone. What reaches the French Admiralty is a binary, submission or resistance. Paris can only give him one answer, and it does. Resist. Reinforcements are ordered from Toulon and Algiers. The British intercept the signal. The timetable tightens. This is where everything turns. Not in a battle order, not in a political decision. A telegram, dashed off in anger and haste by a proud man who has been humiliated by the arrival of a foreign fleet and the insult of a junior officer at his boom. He is not lying. He is not calculating. He is furious, and when a furious man compresses 4 options into 2, he does not think he is changing anything. He does not understand what he has done. His own commanding admiral had already told him to sail to America if this happened. The British are offering him exactly that. His instructions and the enemy's terms align at this single point, and the telegram makes it vanish. The door closes. Quietly, without ceremony. At 1300, swordfish from Ark Royal mine the harbour entrance. Gensoul's indignation sharpens. The British, he tells his staff, have acted in bad faith. The tension in the harbour is a physical thing now. His ships at action stations, their guns trained as best they could, be trained in that crowded anchorage, the morning hardening into afternoon. And then, at 15:30, without warning, Gensoul signals Somerville. He will receive Holland in person. Somerville grants a 2-hour extension. On the bridge of Hood, his expression is something close to hope. Holland boards the Dunkirk and is shown to Gensoul's quarters. The 2 men sit across from each other in the afternoon heat. Holland in his summer whites, Gensoul in the dark blue of a French vice-admiral, and talk for over an hour. Holland explains the British position with care. He says his government does not doubt Darlan's word, but that Germany could move faster than any promise could travel. He lays out the options again. He argues for the West Indies. He argues as though he can still reach something. Gensoul listens. Then he tells Holland privately what he will not put in a signal. It will never happen. If the Germans come for his ships, he will fight them. If there is time, he will sail to the West Indies or the United States rather than yield. He gives Holland his word, one naval officer to another. Holland leaves the Dunkirk believing he has won. He has not, because what Holland does not know, what Somerville has not told him, because London has not told Somerville, is that the British have already intercepted the French Admiralty signal sent in response to Gensoul's truncated telegram. London knows what Gensoul reported. London knows his superiors have ordered resistance. Whatever private promise Gensoul has made in that cabin, whatever genuine intention he has spoken aloud, the signal architecture of the day has already foreclosed the outcome. Holland argues with real hope for something the decision-makers in London have already written off, and nobody tells him. At 17:15, the final signal arrives from the Admiralty. French ships, O's, must comply with our terms or sink themselves or be sunk by you before dark. Somerville signals the Dunkirk. 15 minutes to comply, or he opens fire. The French do not respond. 17:54 hours. James Somerville signals the code word. Anvil. The 15-inch guns of Hood, Valiant, and Resolution train out and settle on the targets across the flat water. The guns fire. The bombardment lasts 10 minutes. The third British salvo strikes the Bretaigne's magazine. The explosion that follows is visible for miles. A column of fire that rises and expands and leaves, when it settles, nothing. The Bretagne is gone. 977 men. In the harbour, burning oil spreads across the surface of the water. Dunkirk takes hits and lists toward the jetty. 200 dead, her guns silenced. Provence runs aground. The destroyer Mogador loses her stern. The French return fire as best they can, their guns bearing on open sky or the jetty behind them, neighbouring ships blocking every clean line of fire. Their salvos fall short, and then, through the smoke and debris, something moves. Strasbourg, faster of the two battle cruisers, one of the two ships the British most needed to destroy, casts off her lines and begins to move. Her captain navigates the mined channel under the cover of Bretagne's burning smoke. The boom, the anti-submarine nets, the oblique passage. She reaches open water, northeast, 28 knots, 5 destroyers flanking her. Hood swings in pursuit. Ark Royal's swordfish go after Strasbourg in the gathering dusk, attack at 20 feet above the sea, claim hits. The hits don't hold. By nightfall, Strasbourg is beyond range, running for Toulon. Hood breaks off. In the harbour at Mers-el-Kébir, more than 1,250 men are dead. That night, Somerville writes to his wife. He says, "I just felt so damned angry being called on to do such a lousy job. We all feel dirty and ashamed that the first time we have been in action was an affair like this." At first light on July 4th, the tugs move through the wreckage. Men use grappling hooks and cargo nets to work the debris field. A severed hand with a watch still ticking, a decapitated head, remains that cannot be identified by any other means, scooped into buckets and covered with canvas. Those identified are laid out in makeshift chapels of rest. Those who cannot be identified are wrapped in sailcloth and driven to the cemetery at Mers-el-Kébir, where long trenches are hacked from the hard ground with picks and shovels borrowed from a town that watched the bombardment from its terraces the afternoon before. Above each grave, a rough wooden cross. One word: inconnu, unknown. Vice Admiral Gensoul stands over the rows of crosses and speaks to his men. "You had promised to obey your superiors," he says, "in whatever they might command you to do for the honor of the flag and the greatness of the arms of France." He has no other words. On the same afternoon of July 3rd, the same hours Holland was boarding the Dunkirk, the same hours Gensoul was refusing the British terms, Another French admiral was sitting across from another British admiral in another harbour, 1,000 miles east, Alexandria. Admiral René-Émile Godefroy commanded the French squadron there. The battleship Lorraine, 4 cruisers, the flag of the Marine Nationale flying above all of them. He had received the same ultimatum as Gensoul. He faced the same demands. He had the same uniform, the same pride, the same obligation to a government in Vichy. His British counterpart was Admiral Andrew Cunningham. They were not strangers. They had worked alongside each other in those waters for months. They met as flag officers, equal rank, with a history between them that was not adversarial. They talked through the night. By July 7th, Godefroy's ships were disarmed. Oil drained from their tanks, breech blocks removed and handed to the French consulate at the port. 11 ships voluntarily neutralized, beyond German reach. 0 dead. The same ultimatum, the same demands, the same warships. In London on July 4th, Churchill addressed Parliament. Both sides of the House cheered. In Washington, Roosevelt told the French ambassador he would have done the same. The Lend-Lease arrangement took shape. Destroyers for bases followed. Churchill's calculation, built on the premise that Britain needed to demonstrate resolve to an uncertain world, produced the consequences he had intended. The political logic was not irrational. The assumption on which it rested, that the French could not be trusted to keep the fleet from Germany, was not unreasonable in the summer of 1940. It turned out to be wrong. Darlan, whose word Churchill did not trust, who had promised the fleet would never go to Germany, became Vichy France's second-in-command. He collaborated with the regime Churchill had feared he would serve. He defected to the Allies in November 1942 during the Allied invasion of North Africa. 6 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, he was shot dead in his office in Algiers by a young French monarchist. Somerville was called before a board of inquiry, not for having carried out the attack, for having let the Strasbourg escape. The man who had opposed the mission from the beginning, who had agonized over it, who described himself in private letters as dirty and ashamed, was scrutinized by the institution he had served his entire life for insufficient ruthlessness. The inquiry found no fault. He kept his command. November 27th, 1942. The Strasbourg is in Toulon Harbour. The ship that navigated the Main Channel with 977 men burning behind her, that made Toulon at 2100 hours on July 4th to a hero's reception that sat beyond British reach for 2 full years. Her crew is opening the seacocks. The demolition charges are set. The water is rising in her engine rooms. The Germans have come for the ships. The French are destroying them. All 77 warships, scuttled by French hands on French orders to prevent German capture. Exactly as Darlan had promised, exactly as Gensoul told Holland in the privacy of his quarters on the Dunkirk on the afternoon of July 3rd, 1940. They did what they said they would do. One more ship to account for. HMS Hood, 42,100 tons, 860 feet of grey steel, the largest warship in the world and the most famous ship in the Royal Navy. The ship from whose bridge James Somerville signalled Anvil. The ship used to destroy France's fleet so that Germany could not have it. On May 24th, 1941, 10 months after Mers-el-Kébir, Hood encountered the German battleship Bismarck in the Denmark Strait. A shell from Bismarck penetrated Hood's rear magazine. The explosion was visible for 20 miles. Hood sank in 3 minutes. Of her 1,418 men, 3 survived. The ship sent to destroy France's fleet so that Germany could not have. It was destroyed by Germany. The harbour at Mers-el-Kébir, today. The Bretagne lies where she has always been. She has not moved. Her hull is intact. Her 977 crew are still inside her. They have been there for 85 years. The cemetery at Mers-el-Kébir still stands. Many of the graves still carry the wooden crosses placed there in July 1940. Each one bears the same word they bore the morning after the guns stopped. Inconnu. The French scuttled their fleet at Toulon in November 1942. They did what they had always said they would do. James Somerville died in 1949. He never stopped regretting Mers-el-Kébir.